Well, it's 3 a.m. Sunday morning, and I'm about ready to go into the Mendocino Hotel and edit this video. But first I want to tell you that these kind of videos, these story videos, only happen on Saturday. I do my regular machinist videos on Tuesday. So if you don't like these videos, just skip over it and hang out and wait for Tuesday. Okay. Okay, it's story time again, and this one is about, I don't know, it happened about 15 years ago or so, we decided to go to France, or actually to Europe, but we ended up spending the whole time in France because we loved it so much. So we landed in France and just kind of had backpacks, and we landed in this funky old hotel in downtown Paris. It was spectacular, literally. And you know, of course, we're jet lagged, so we're walking around at 4 o'clock in the morning in parts of France probably that were fairly dangerous, and you know, we're just a couple of starry-eyed tourists, so we don't give a crap. So we end up at this little restaurant about 4 o'clock in the morning, and we sit down at the table, and the waiter is absolutely horrible to us. He just I can't tell you how bad he was, how much he mistreated us. And we were just laughing at it because, you know, we're having a great time no matter what. Turns out the people next to us were from Hayward, which is where I grew up. And it's like, what are you doing here? And they were here because they were doing the same thing at 4 o'clock in the morning. So, you know, we spent a couple of days in Paris. We decide to go to a little town west of Paris, out on the coast, and we jump on a bus, or first we jump on a train, take a train most of the way, and then we get on a bus, and the bus literally just is going from little dinky ass town to little dinky ass town. And in Europe, there's a town every 5 miles, and it's as far as a horse would go in a day. You know, a horse would go without wiping them out. So every 5 miles there's a town, and every 5 miles this bus would stop and pick up a few passengers and drop off a few passengers, and the bus driver had to have a conversation with each one of them, and we were having a great time. It took, you know, hours and hours and hours to get to this little town of Honfleur, which turned out to be right on the Normandy coast, and just down the coast was where the Second World War began its final conclusion in Normandy. So anyhow, we won't talk about that part of the story, but we spent 3 or 4 days in Honfleur. We came back to Paris, and we rode that bus back out, and the whole time I realized, Jesus, buses only go to tourist places. They don't go to these little towns out in the sticks, and that's pretty much where we wanted to go. We wanted to kind of explore the back country of Europe, or in this case of France. And so we went back to Paris, and back up a couple of steps. About 3 or 4 days before we left for Europe, we went to a wedding, and we're sitting at the wedding, and there was a couple across from us, and we started talking to them. We said, "Hey, we're going to Europe," and the guy says, "Look, go to Utrecht, Holland, and buy yourself a car." And I said, "What do you mean, buy myself a car?" He says, "At Utrecht, Holland, every Tuesday morning, day in, day out, every Tuesday morning, they have the Utrecht Auto Flea Market." And I'm like, "Really?" He says, "Yeah, you can get cars really cheap, and it's no problem. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I'd put that in the back of my mind. So we jump on the plane and go to Europe, and now we're back in Paris trying to figure out how to be able to get to these little backcountry towns. And I say, what about the Utrecht Auto Flea Market? And my wife Barbara says, oh, hey, that's a good idea. Let's go to Holland. So we jump on the bullet train. I mean, that train was traveling, I don't know, 150 miles an hour. So paralleled the freeway from time to time and literally passing cars like they were standing still. And, you know, in Europe, they weld all of the joints of the rails. So you don't get this clickety-clack thing that happens in America. What you get is this kind of a singing. It's like, and you just zip down these rails doing 150 miles an hour. So, you know, in about, I don't know, 6 hours or so, we go from Paris to Amsterdam. And that night we stayed in a hotel, and then we got up the next morning. First thing, it's Tuesday morning, we're ready to go. We jump on a bus, we take the bus 30 miles south to Utrecht. And it turns out that the flea market happens in the local fairgrounds, which is like most fairgrounds. Big, huge parking lot, lots of room to do everything. And oh, by the way, we're back in Mendocino because the air has been so bad in Nevada City that it's now 3 weeks later, and we've decided we're coming back to Mendo and get in our canoe, and we're floating up the big river, taking a bit of a break right now for me to tell you this story. So we get off the bus at Utrecht, and we're at the wrong end of the fairgrounds. So we have to, and it's fairly early in the morning. So, and I figured we're going to get there early, and we're going to, you know, get first in line, and we'll be ready to go, because I think they opened at 9 or something like that. So we're at the far end of the fairgrounds, so it takes us like almost an hour to walk around the fairgrounds to the front gate. And, you know, probably had we stayed on the bus, but we didn't understand, it would have taken us to the front gate eventually. We arrive at the front gate, and there must be 500 people standing at the front gate waiting to get in. And I'm like, whoa. So we kind of shouldered our way in and elbowed our way in, certainly way before COVID days, because literally it was a crush of people, and we're just kind of wiggling our way through, trying to get closer to the front door. And we come to the front door of the fairgrounds, and you know, they're not charging anything, so it's no big deal. And we just can't keep working our way in, and we work our way into the main hall of the fairgrounds, which would be, you know, the size of 2 or 3 indoor theaters. Big hall. And it's so smoky in there, you couldn't see across the room. I mean, everybody had a cigarette, and everybody was huffing. Okay, we're back at the campsite while my wife is making the fire, and you know, it's like I don't want to be too aggressive about making the fire, but I really wanted to do it. But it's her turn. Okay, fine. Well, looks like she's going to do a pretty good job of it. Anyhow, we're back to the story. Where were we? We were in, in this smoke-filled room. So we're walking, you know, kind of weaving our way through hundreds and hundreds of people in this room to try to get to the far wall where it's hopefully a little less smoky, and the front entrance And boy, they're not going to open the door until 9 o'clock, and there's no way around that. They got guards at the door, and the doors are locked, and nobody's getting through. So we come to the other side of this big room, and there's a smaller room. And the smaller room's probably the size of maybe half the size of a basketball court, and then all the doors, and there might be 6 or 8 doors, and so we step into that room, and there's a fair amount of people, and we just kind of work our way up to the front wall, and it's still about 20 minutes before the place is going to open. And we think, well, it's closer to the front door. There's a couple of air gaps in the front door, and the cool air is coming in. We get right up to the door and take in some fresh air. And within that 20-minute period, it went from about maybe 50 or 100 people in that room to more like 500 people in that room. And they were literally just crushed together. I had some big fat guy at my back with his belly pushed right up against my back, and somebody's pushed up against the front of me, and somebody's pushed up against the side of me, and I'm just standing there like this, and that's all I can do. I got my backpack between my legs, and I'm just sandwiched in, and it just, the room keeps getting more and more packed, and everybody's smoking a cigarette. It's like, it was pretty insane. Finally, we get to the 9 o'clock mark, and they open the doors, and everybody just runs out the doors, and they're running up the aisles, and they're just like, pointing at cars, and I'll take that one, and I'll take that one. Now, obviously, it was a bunch of dealers. And here we were with our little backpack looking for, a $400 or $500 car. And we were told at that wedding that there were cars like that there. So we walk up in one aisle and down another, and there's these beautiful gold wing Mercedes, just in exquisite shape, and they're like, $1,500 for a Mercedes. I was just like, really? But I didn't want a $1,500 car. I wanted a $400 car. So we walk up and down the aisles, and there's all kinds of really great deals. I mean, it's amazing. But there's no $400 cars. Up and down the aisles, we must have spent, an hour wandering up and down these aisles, back and forth, maybe 20 aisles or so, and there might be 100 aisles. So we go from there, and we're at 20 aisles or so, and we started to get pretty disappointed, and we come around a bend, and here's this one old Toyota Celica or something like that, 1987 or somewhere in that general area. And we walk up to it, and I'm thinking, okay, and it's kind of beat up, and it's not too pretty looking, and I'm thinking, okay, good. That's pretty much what we want. So we walk up to the car, and here's this guy sitting there. He must weigh 300 pounds, and he's sitting in the driver's seat, and the whole car is just kind of leaning down to one side. And I look in and I said, well, how much do you want? And he says $400 or 800 gluten, which is the money in that country. And I'm like, oh, and I have him open the hood. He gets out of the car, and I have him open the hood, and the driver's seat is, he must have been driving that car for years, because the driver's seat is completely packed it down, and there's like a divot in the seat, and of course the seats are all ripped. The windshield's got a crack in it. I mean, it's endless, the things that are wrong with this car. He opens the hood, it's a disaster under the hood. It's like you know, oily, and obviously stuff has been oil's been flinging in that engine for years and years, and the belts are all wiped out, and the radiator hoses are like old and rotted, and it is like, whoa, I don't think so. But so I told him, well, we're gonna go on, we may be back. The old be back thing. So we've wandered past, and I was like, we'll just keep that in the back of our mind just in case there's nothing else. And so far there hadn't been anything, just really nice cars, and starting at about $1,000 and going up. So it was either spend $1,000, which we kind of didn't have, or go back to that piece of crap Toyota. And so we wandered back up another aisle and back down another aisle, 4 or 5 more aisles, and nothing. There was nothing there. And we wandered up this one aisle, and out by itself, I mean, there was like these fancy cars on both sides, and the salesmen were just like, they're, all of these guys are walking around kicking tires and stuff. And literally kicking tires, the buyers. And I'm like, really, you're kicking tires? But they were, and they were making deals left and right, and there was a lot of deals going on. This is like a regular flea market, except it's cars, and they're starting at $1,000. But there's kind of an opening, and there's fancy cars here and fancy cars here, and sitting right in the middle is maybe a 1978 or 9. Oh, what was it, Barbara? Oh, a Suzuki. Where were we? Oh, yeah, walking up and down the aisles. Here's this little Suzuki Alto. I mean, it is cute, and it's not got a dent on it. And I walk up to the guy and I says, well, how much do you want? He says, 1,100 glutens. And I'm like, well, that's about $500 or $600. And I'm thinking, well, that's all we've found so far, and we're halfway through the market, and so the deal begins. I says, well, how about 800? And he goes, well, I got to talk to my boss. So he goes over to his boss and he talks to his boss, and he comes back and he says, 1,000 glutens. That's it. No deals. I said, 1,000 glutens. Okay, so that's about $500. I says, okay, let's look under the hood. So he pops the hood. It's pristine. I mean, whoever owned this car took it to the dealership to get it worked on. There was literally dealership tags on all of these parts that had been replaced, new water pump, new alternator, all of them dealer parts. So somebody had just taken just baby care of this car. So I said, okay, I'll take it, $500. And and I'm watching these deals going around, we're waiting for him to take care of the paperwork and get everything all settled. And I'm watching all these deals go around, and the buyers and the sellers, and they're doing their little dance, and they're, you see that? And then the buyers comes back with a number, and the seller comes back, and they this is a good car, just and I don't understand mostly what they're talking about, but I can tell just from where they're, how they're pointing at things, and they're getting upset, and it's all a put on. So finally the guy comes back with the paperwork, and I hand him the $500 or the 1,000 glutens, and he hands me the paperwork, and he says, okay, now you've got to go over to the licensing bureau, which is on the property, and then once you're done with the licensing bureau, then you go over and get the license plates right next door. And then once you get the license plate, you go right next door and you get the insurance. And I'm like, really? You can do this all in one spot? He goes, yeah. So I haul ass over there. Of course, it's about an hour and a half in, and there's like a ton of people that have already bought a bunch of cars, and they're getting all the licensing and everything. So there's lines going out of the building, down this street, and and I've left Barbara back at the car because we had our backpacks and everything. So she puts the backpacks in the back of the car, and she's waiting for me. Hour goes by, 2 hours goes by. I'm slowly working my way through the line, and I finally get up to the first guy, and he looks at the paperwork, and he says, "Oh, that'll be 85 glutens or something, some number." And I hand the money over, and he stamps the thing and hands me this thing, and then he said, "Okay, go over to that window." And of course, now I got to wait in another line. So I go over to that window, and I'm in that line for a half hour, 45 minutes. And as we get up closer to the front of the line, they're literally making license plates on site. So I get up to my spot. I talk to the guy. He says, "Oh yeah, it'll be 65 glutens or some number, And I give him the money, and he says, "Okay, walk over there and wait for your license plates." And I walk over there, I'm watching this machine, and it's literally a handheld machine. And the guy puts a little piece of aluminum in there, and he grabs the handle, and he puts his foot up on the machine, and he pulls the handle down and pushes it back up. And one license plate comes out with these numbers, and it's all painted, and it all looks like a regular license plate. And then, of course, he has to do it a second time because, there's two, one on front and one on the back. So it's like, they put it in a little envelope and they hand it to me, and I'm like, I got my license. So now I'm going to go over to the insurance, and of course the insurance is another 85 glutens or 185 glutens, whatever it is. It's the insurance for the next 6 weeks, because that's how long our vacation is. And I'm like, okay, well, let's do it. So we did it. And so I'm doing this whole process in about 2.5 hours. And Barbara meanwhile, back at the car, she's starting to get worried that something happened to me. Finally we get all of the bureaucracy done. I walk out of the building, I got the license plate, I got the insurance, I got everything. We walk over to the car, and we get in the car, and we start it, and it starts right up. It's a sweetheart of a little car. And amongst a crowd of people walking up and down the aisles, we get in the little car, and we just drive out. And just go real slow, and people kind of get out of the way, and we drive it to the main gate, and then we drive out, and that's it. And we're back out on the highway, and we've got our little car. Go to a gas station, put some gas in it, and the first thing I want to do is get some tools, because I don't know what this car is like, and I'm not about to get stuck out in the middle of nowhere with no tools. So we go to a kind of a Costco place, a very early Costco place. It's more like a auto parts store with a couple of groceries, but they have a set of tools, and I can't remember how much you paid for $50 for set of end wrenches, screwdrivers, all the basics, pliers, crescent wrench, a few specialty tools that I knew I was going to need if I was going to do anything. And then and I had checked the transmission fluid, and it was down a little bit, so I got a pint of gear oil, because it was a stick transmission. So we get it together. I put that pint of gear oil in, it fills it right up, and literally for the next 6 weeks we drive that car without one problem. Nothing. Toward the end, I had to put a bit more transmission fluid in, and that was it. We get to the end of our vacation, and we decide, this has been such a good. I want to take the car home. I want to put it on a ship, and I want to take it home, because it's such a sweetheart of a little car. By the way, 3 cylinders. It travels 55 miles an hour top speed. So we're going down the Autobahn and we're doing 55 miles an hour in the slow a lane as we can get. And these cars are hauling past us like we're standing still. So most of the time during that 6 weeks we spent on the back roads, which is where we wanted to be anyhow. So we just pretty much wandered from town to town. And the way Barbara and I worked it is whenever one or the other of us said turn right, we would just turn right. And we'd wander off into this little road. Now, unlike America, where you take a right-hand turn on some odd road and it leads to a smaller road and it leads to another smaller road and it leads to another smaller road and finally it leads to somebody's driveway. And that's it, the dead end. In Europe, it's not that way. In Europe, you take a right-hand turn onto some oddball road and it leads to another road and it'll lead to a smaller and smaller road, but then at some point the roads start getting bigger again and you end up back out on a freeway. And so we just wandered, spent 6 weeks wandering around. And at the end, we gave the car to a doctor and his wife and his daughter, who it was her first car. And I will tell the story about the doctor taking us to dinner that night later. By the way, this is Nick Collier checking out in Mendocino in the fresh, clear air.